I am proud to present this in-depth Burn Sorcerer guide. I have played over 50 hours of this build already in the beta, and I've calculated probably the same amount of hours to provide it with such quality. It is definitely no braindead build where people went full damage. It's well balanced between damage and survivability, and also suitable for hardcore and the highest difficulties. Let me give you a brief overview of all the great infos that await you in this guide. If you're only interested in a specific part, the video is divided into chapters for easier navigation. And of course, you will find a full skill tree here, but on top of this, there's also a level cheat sheet ready that you can open while you play to tell you the exact order of skill selection for maximum efficiency. Also, we will not just go over all the legendary aspects. We will provide a tier list of all the affixes that can roll on the different gear pieces, so you can determine in no time if the piece you just dropped is worth keeping and rerolling or not. And then we will go over the gem selection to optimize your build, and we finish it off with a fully optimized Paragonboard with the best in slot Glyphs and pathings. One last word, I am aware that things can change quickly in a live service game like Diablo 4, so you can expect regular updates to all my guides to keep them valuable for you. And now let's jump into the video. So we are starting off with the skill tree. As already mentioned, the cheat sheet will be available at the end of the video. Here we will just take a look on which skills we are actually using, how they synergize into each other, how they synergize with our items that we need to wear, and how they synergize with the Paragonboard. Because everything in this guide is optimized to scale off each other to get the multiplicative effects of the damage calculations. So we are starting off with Firebolt. Firebolt gives us a bit of direct damage and burn damage. This build is called Burn Sorcerer because enemies will be burning all the time. That's important because this also means that enhanced Firebolt, which pierces through burning enemies, will basically piercing all the time. And then we are having the first thing that's important to note. Critical strikes with Firebolt increase the burning damage you deal to enemy by 20%. And this build will be crit centered. So this is better than getting the mana right here. Then next up, we need to go into defensive. So this build is made for higher difficulties and for hardcore. It's not braindead damage. It's well balanced between damage and survivability. And this is why we are going into Flame Shield. Enhanced Flame Shield for the movement speed. It's good to have, but it's not the main reason. What we are actually going after right here is the heals 50% of your missing life. This is important. We will get to it why. It's important later on. Then teleport, obviously, for like getting out of hairy situations, repositioning yourself, and having Flame Shield that makes us immune, and a teleport to get out of CCs gives us two options to get out of CCs. So it will be really hard to get caught off position with this build. And then right here, okay, if we're hitting enemies, usually we don't use the teleport offensively. We mostly use it defensively. So this is not what we're actually going for. But if we're using it defensively, having a 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds afterwards, of course, is really nice to get healed up. Then we are having the Ice Armor for a barrier. Really nice. And of course, the more damage we are dealing during Ice Armor being up, we are getting even more barrier added. This is important to note. And we're going into enhanced Ice Armor for the 25% mana regeneration. We don't need any of the of those two. We will not play around vulnerable enemies. So basically, whenever you're trying a build, don't try to go for too many extra stats. And we are focusing mostly on burning stats, crit rate, and critical strike damage. Then here we are having the elemental attunement. We've already said we are focusing on critical hits. So critical strikes have up to a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. That can only happen once every 10 seconds. And this scales, maybe doing this here. Using a cooldown grants 30% of your maximum life as a barrier. So even our teleport is now a barrier. So we have access to 3 different barriers, easily proccing over 10 seconds, but if we are getting an amulet later on with defensive skills, we can get this even more going to then buy a time frame for the elemental attitude to actually proc. So if you're playing this build correctly, you will have 90% or even higher uptime of barriers. And we've already talked about the protection. To actually get to the protection, you need to go to align the elements. This is pretty nice versus bosses where you usually don't get hit for quite a while and then you maybe take one chunk. It's not that good against normal packs anymore because the stacking is too slow. And yeah, but you need to do it for the unlock anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Then the mana shield. For every time you spend 100 mana, you gain 15% damage reduction. I will explain you now exactly how this works in our rotation. The Hydra, this is important here, it costs 20 mana, keep this in mind. And we are going into Enhanced Hydra, so whenever we are healthy, we cast one additional head of the Hydra, so it's 4 instead of 3, and healthy is considered being over 80% health. Then, of course, we are a Burn Sorcerer, so we're taking the Burn source, and this is now also, if you have counted with me, it was the third source of burn. So Hydra is one source of burn, Flame Shield is a source of burn, and Firebolt is a source of burn. It's important how many sources we have. And then one of our main damage skills alongside with Hydra is our Firewall. So Hydra and Firewall are going to be our mana burners. And in the Firewall, it's really hard to keep the minions centered into the firewalls. So I highly recommend going into the Mage's Firewall, which means that even if they step out of the firewall, they burn for another 3 seconds. And the other thing, the Wizard's Firewall would only give us mana regeneration, and we will see later why we don't need any more mana regeneration. Our build is not that mana thirsty, and we also have enough mana regeneration already, so this is the best option. And if you have done the math with me now, you will see Hydra is 20 and Firewall is 30. And our normal skill rotation is placing 2 Hydras and 2 Firewalls, which surprisingly adds up to exactly 100 mana and basically allows us to get the 15% damage reduction going for every rotation we are doing. So yeah, we basically have this up permanently. Then let's take a look at all the passives right here. We are taking Inner Flames. That basically means whenever we are healthy, that's the same as with the Hydra right here, we are dealing 9% increased damage. This is perfectly fine. And then we are having a lucky hit chance. So your Pyromancy skills, which are surprisingly all of them, have a 15% chance to immobilize enemies for 2 seconds. And this chance is doubled again while we are healthy. So we are playing with barriers up all the time. So our state of being healthy is really high in the game. So we are getting those stats for a really high proportion of our playtime. And then we are having a scaling effect onto Crippling Flames by devouring place, which means we are dealing increased critical strike damage against burning enemies. And if they are also immobilized, this bonus is increased to 75%. So we've already said we are going heavy into crit rate and critical strike damage. And this is currently our only well of immobilized. But when we're coming to the items, I will show you another way to get this build, which currently lacks CC. How we getting the CC in there to then be able to proc the 75% bonus reliably. Then our next key passives are the Fury Surge, which basically is our reason why we don't need the Wizard's Firewall, because we're getting 30% mana regeneration right here if we're killing a burning enemy, which is basically every enemy we are killing, because all enemies will always be burning. And this paired with the 25% from the Ice Armor, where it's more than enough to sustain for our build. Then we are having the Endless Pyre, which gives us increased burning damage to all enemies for each second they remain burning, which is perfectly fine because they will be burning all the time. And now comes one of our key sustain elements, which means every 1 second you heal for 0.9% of your maximum life. for each nearby burning enemy, and the healing is increased to 1.8 from bosses. So maybe here we need to know what are nearby enemies. So usually, if you have no barrier up, this build is a kite build, where you will not go near enemies. But as soon as you have the barriers up, you're going near enemies. And for example, if you are taking damage, and let's say you're at 20% health, you pop your barrier, you go into the enemies will attack your barrier, and in the background, warmth will heal up your health. So the barrier is protecting, and you can go and heal up your health. And maybe to understand what nearby means, so if you imagine this is your character height, and it would fall over, this is the head. This is basically the hitbox of your character, and everything that's inside this area would count as near. So this is our sustain. And now let's finish it off with the key passive, one of the biggest power sources currently in builds. And here we are going with Izu's Ferocity. I have seen many burn builds that are going for combustion, because on the first glance it might seem more logically, because it's a burning thing. For the more sources you have, right, this bonus is doubled. We are having 4 burning sorcerers, so we could basically keep this up all the time and have 12% increased damage. That would be basically our max, 12%. Keep that in mind. Because now if we're looking at our damage multipliers that we can get from Izu's Ferocity, it's going to be way higher. And as we've already said, we are going heavy into critical rate and critical strike damage. And this means whenever we are against enemies that have above 50% life, we are having 25% critical strike damage. If we are going against lower ones, we have 5% critical strike chance. It's also important that we are having the chance against enemies below life. And if we are killing an enemy with a critical strike, we have the bonus for 3 seconds against all enemies. And the way this build is designed is as long as we have enough stretch monsters around while we're farming, we are getting an insane boost because we can keep this up all the time. And to understand this even more, we should have to go and take a look at the items. Because one of the key things to make this build work is the insane amount of attack speed that we can get from Izu's Ferocity. So basically, whenever we are proccing this, killing an enemy with a critical strike, our attack speed right here, if we're having a max roll, can be increased by 75%. And for the people that don't know yet how attack speed currently works, there is no cast time reduction or something to make spells go faster. It's everything of this is counted into attack speed. So even your Hydra basically is attacking onto your attack speed. So if you have more attack speed, you also have more DPS. It's not only for basic skills, even though we basic attack quite a lot. So this is a key factor. Then we've already said that this build allows us to keep barriers up almost all of the time. So if you remember right here, all of those are barriers. We can get barriers from everywhere. This is basically the key. And this is also the reason why we can go with the conceit aspect on our weapon, where we're having a 100% bonus, which means we would get 50% increased damage multiplicator all the time. It will basically be up at least 90% of the time while we're playing this build. And now, if we're taking a look at the boots, this is what I've talked about previously. This is the way how we're getting immobilized into this build. So this is how we're using our CC right here. The Flame Shield lets you move unhindered through enemies. Enemies you move through while Flame Shield is active are immobilized for 3 seconds if we're getting a max roll right there. So we can run through all enemies and make them immobilized. And then, we've already seen this right here, we are getting the insane 75% multiplicator on it. And we also don't have to be worried if our Flame Shield is down that we can't get out of the CC anymore, because we don't need to have the Flame Shield to remove a CC to reposition. We can do this with teleport easily. So we don't lose out on safety here by this decision. Then on the ring, we are having 20% increased critical strike chance against injured enemies. And while you are healthy, your crowd control duration is increased by 40%. This means while we are healthy, and we are healthy while we are fighting against enemies, because we are in the flame shield, which gives us immunity, so we can't even get attacked if we're running through the enemies, which means we're having another 40% crowd control duration on our 3% immobilize effect right there. And we are having critical strike chance against injured enemies. Injured is considered 35% of the health. And this, again, if you remember the Ezo's ferocity, makes it a lot easier for us to kill enemies with a critical strike. Then, just to pump this off with a bit more damage, we are having the engulfing flames, which means when enemies are affected by more damage over time than their total life, we are dealing another 40% increased burning damage to them. This is really important, but could also be one of the aspects you would switch out the earliest, depending on what new aspects are going to come out on the release. Because what this aspect does is, when you're fighting against an elite pack, for example, and you see their health bar, and it's not the normal red, it's starting to go into a dark red, that means it's basically going to die of your burning damage. And you can already continue in the dungeon, for example, and keep running. And if it would drop a legendary, you don't have to worry. It would instantly get sent back to your post box. So there's no loss. And this allows you to progress faster and even continue progressing in a dungeon, even though the monsters are not dead yet. And now let's take a look, because we also need defensive ones. So one of the best defensive ones on a mage is definitely this armor aspect right here. The mage has intelligence as a base stat, which gives us resistance to all elements. So resistances are usually never a problem on the mage, but the mage is lacking armor really heavily. And for any type of damage we are dealing, we are stacking armor. And since we're doing burn damage, we can stack up to 50% armor fairly quickly. And one of our weaknesses of the class, we have basically cancelled out with this aspect. So this is a must-have. Then for the gloves, we will go for a Hydra. So one additional Hydra. Maybe if you paid attention, to proc the mana shield, the 15% damage reduction, we would need to cast 100 mana. And we want to have the Hydra twice. So we basically need this item and Firewall to get this damage reduction permanently up. And many people have been sleeping a bit on the Hydra or got carried away when they actually nerfed the damage of the Hydra. The Hydra is still one of the highest damage skills of the Sorcerer. It's now tied with Firewall, and it's definitely the best single target DPS source currently if you're going into a burn build. It's not working anymore with like chain lightning and stuff, but if you're going in a full burn build and you're having the burn Hydra ready, then it's still insane DPS. And when we're coming to the enchantments, you will realize how good the Hydra really is. With the chest armor, we are going for damaging elite enemy grants you a barrier, because we've already talked about it, barrier, more DPS, uptime. So it's just another way for us to grant a barrier and getting more damage. So we basically turned a defensive aspect into defense, but also into offense, which is great. And then for the helmet, we are going for basic skills, grant 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. Compared with all the damage reduction that we can get from other sources, we are going to be so tanky. We will have so much life, so much barrier. It will be crazy how well balanced this build is between damage and survivability. And we will also have this up all the time, because our rotation is 2 times Hydra, 2 times Firewall, and then we start auto-attacking with Firebolt. So in our rotation, it will never take 6 seconds our rotation. So we can keep this up all the time. And now let's take a look at the skill bar and probably more importantly at the enchantments. And since I've already said I am playing hardcore only, and this is why I am having a flame shield into my enchantment slot. If you are playing softcore, I highly recommend exchanging this with a fireball, because this will then allow the enemies that you're killing to explode in a fireball, and 50% damage, which is just great and gives you even more AoE clear. It's just really good. But what the build is actually about is the firewall enchantment. So each time an enemy takes burning damage, there's a 5% chance to spawn 2 firewalls underneath them. So 2 firewalls. So with every burning damage we are dealing, we have the chance to spend 60 mana on point. And if you realize that we have 4 different sources of burning, so we have the burning from Firebolt, we have it from Firewall, we have it from Hydra, we have it from Flame Shield. Our enemies will be constantly burning non-stop. So this passive will be proccing like no other. It will be insane. And this is basically one of the keys of the build, like keeping this passive proccing all the time. And how are we increasing our burning damage even further? For this, we'll have to go into the Paragonboard. Just a quick explanation on how I choose the perfect glyphs for the Paragonboards. So basically, what I did, I was calculating how many stats was everywhere in those, so like, for example, how much dex is in this area, how much int is in this area, and all this kind of stuff. And then based on this decision, I decided which glyph would get the most value in each of the glyph slots. So, also worth mentioning, all the paths here are optimized. That means, if you're going over a rare knot, you always have a second bonus. So you need to have 200 intelligence to actually get the another 10% non-physical damage. And non-physical damage is basically all the damage we are doing. It's being increased by 10%. And I've made sure that the most amount of rare nodes are actually also getting their second bonus. So I would say this board is at least 90% optimized. And if we are going deeper into playing and are able to test more out, I will give you the 100% optimized version right here. So this is the starter board. So we will go along right here. We're picking up non-physical damage. Here you can see that one of those 2 lives would actually not be necessary, but we had, after optimizing the board, we had 2 points left. So I was able to pick up another 4% life, 2 here and 2 on another board. And then in this section, we have to go and take a look at the glyph first. We are going with the Adapt glyph right here. Because for every 5 intelligence within within range, mastery skills gain 3% increased damage. Our firewall is a mastery skill, and this area right here, this board, has 70 int on it. So we can scale this times 14. Remember? Times 14. And we are also getting the bonus because it's easy to get the 40 int right here, which means we are getting that 20% increased area on our firewall, giving it even more AoE capability. And then we are going here for this rare node because it gives us 10 intelligence and scales on this. And here we are just going through the path, picking up the non-physical damage. And then we are going on to our first additional board. Here, it's important that the main damage source that you want to get from all the Paragon boards is the legendary node. And this is located right here on the bottom. And that means your burning damage is increased by 40% of your critical strike damage, further increased by 5% for every 20 intelligence we have. So intelligence we will stack anyways. That's not a big deal. But the critical strike damage, if you remember how much critical strike damage we are being able to get, here alone it's a 75% bonus, and you will see we are getting even more, and our gear can be optimized in this direction, so we can scale so heavily on this legendary node. It's a must-have early on. Here we can just get some damage reduction from burning enemies, which is also important and which we will try to pick up whenever we can. We are going into this little path right here. Here we can get some more damage to burning enemies and also some of the most valuable stats. This is damage to elites. And as you can see right here, we have also already managed to optimize the board to get the 270 willpower going for another additional 10% damage. And around this node, we also find some of the best rare nodes with 8.5% damage to elites, and we all obviously want to take those. Then we can make a little downside right here, where we're getting the damage reduction from elites. So what kills us? Elites kill us, right? We're not dying to trash, so it's really important to get this going. We can pick up everything, and we also get a little side note right here for the 100 armor, which we are also lacking. And we have more than enough points to be able to do this little side step here. Then next up is our second Glyph slot, where we are going to choose the Pyromaniac Glyph, which gives our 30% bonus to our fire damage and our damage reduction modifiers. So we've already said all enemies will always be burning. So damage reduction from burning enemies will basically mean damage reduction from everything that's around us. And therefore, we are going right here into this, and we are able to pick up even more. And on this side, we are able to pick up damage to burning enemies. And we have a bit optimized path here because, we need the 25 willpower to actually get the additional bonus. This is why we need to step down here and pick up this other 5 willpower. And this allows us, for every pyromancy skill you cast or every second you channel incinerate, this is not important for us, increase your fire damage by 2% for 6 seconds. We are having 4 pyromancy skills in our setup, so we are able to get another 8% multiplier from this position right there. Then next up is our secondary board. It's the Searing Heat. And here we are basically just here for the Glyph slot and for a little extension right there. So the Glyph slot we are having, for every 5 dexterity purchased within range, you deal 2% increased damage to burning targets, and you deal 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. Direct damage are Firebolt and Hydra. Firewall sadly is no direct damage. And this Glyph socket right here is suitable for this rune because we're having a total of 11 multiplicators on here, which allows us to go for 22% increased damage to burning targets. Right here, we're having fire resistance. This is basically just a nice side cop, but this is where we actually want to go. And this is also the only rare node I was not able to get going. I was missing 11 willpower here. We will see as soon as the Glyphs are being leveled higher and we're getting more stats, and those runes will, those requirements will then also be met. And then we are having this little side step here. I already said we have opportunities to get even more critical strike damage, and this node right here is one of those where you can see we are picking up fire damage and also critical strike damage to scale even more. Then next up is the Ceaseless Conduit, and this is just a pass-through board. And this is also an option, so you don't have to go those boards in this order that I've just said it. So for example, if you don't have a Glyph yet to place, this is basically the board you can choose. It's a pass-through board, as I just said. Cause this has some of the best rare node that's currently in the game. And this is the Hunter Killer with 16% damage to elites and even more movement speed. It's sadly for the current stage not possible to get the 32%, but as soon as you scale up more, you will be able to get the 440 dex there as well to get another 16. And even around this node, we will find another 8.5 damage to elites twice. So this node right here is really good, especially if you don't have a Glyph yet. It's your go-to to start on a Paragon and then respec later into the Glyphs and then just add it on. From here, we are going into Enchant Master. And this is our last Glyph. So if we're taking a look, usually Like I've been experimenting a lot, and going more than 4 Glyphs is not worth it. You get more value if you focus on 4 Glyphs and get the full value of the Glyphs going. And this is our last one, and this is called the Torch. For every 5 willpower purchase within range, you deal 2% increased burning damage. Here we are also having an 11 multiplicator for 22%, and you deal 2% increased damage per nearby burning enemy up to 12.5%, which also scales nicely because we already learned with our flame shield we want to go into the enemies to immobilize them. While we are doing this, we are getting our heal with Wrath, and we can also now get the increased damage because this bonus will be up while we are being immobilized, while the enemies are being immobilized, and we are casting our 75% crit damage introduced hits. Here we're having non-physical damage, basically boosts all of it. Here we're having the resistance. This was just a pickup because we had the points left, and we could get 10 intelligence, which was one of the better last pickups for the points where we were not able to reach anything. Then we're making 3 more little side steps right here. Here we are able to pick up even more damage to elites, which now means we have picked up the full potential of damage to elites, which I think personally is extremely valuable because it's a multiplicative damage multiplicator, so it's not additive, and yeah, great damage right there. And down here we are also able to pick up more damage, and this is also one of the things that I said at the beginning, we were able to pick up another 2% life node. And as you already noticed, like max life is really important in the skill build because barriers always depend on your max life. And then on this board right here, the Elemental Summoner, we are again able to squeeze out a bit more damage. Because here we can see we are having the non-physical damage again with a little side through. And this makes us use all of our points to an extremely high amount of efficiency right here. And here we are having the tier list I promised at the start for our gear. So basically when you're having a helmet, you do want to have 1 socket on it, and we are putting rubies in it. Again, we have said life is really valuable. Everything scales on our max life, so increasing our max life is our best option. S tier basically is like, if you find it on your gear, it's an insta-cop, right? You will keep it. If you find 3 of those, you will try to reroll into one of the other, depending on your resources and gold. So for the helmet, definitely you can get ranks into Hydra. Hydra is one of your damage skills, so you should definitely be doing it. And you can get flat life. So in Diablo 3, for example, you were able to get Vitality to get your life up. Here, there's no main stat increasing your life, so getting flat life is key here. And then, of course, our main stat, which is pretty nice, and we're having 40 life on kill. Keep this stat in mind. It's going to be important, this stat, when we're talking about weapons again. Then stuff that's also okay. Like, I'm not saying that A and B tier is like crap. I was checking all the affixes that could possibly roll, and I've only put stuff in here in this guide that is actually useful. So if you get any of this, right, don't be like disappointed or anything. Like if you're having stuff from this situation, you are getting better than not having it. So like this is insta-cop. This is maybe you want to think a bit a little. Because you will have a barrier up all the time. You are based on lucky hit to reset your defensives, and you're based on lucky hit to get immobilized going. So lucky hit during barriers or barrier generation, it all fits the build pretty decent. Next up is the chest. Here we can have 2 sockets and rubies still for the same reasoning. And since we are here onto a defensive part, we are able to get a defensive multiplier. We are having 14% damage reduction from burning enemies. This is the max you can roll on a chest right there. And since all our enemies are always burning, this is perfect. 215 life, also fine. You can have even damage multiplicators here with like 14% fire damage or pyromancy, which is also fine because everything is pyromancy. 10% damage, also decent. And here we are having damage reduction, barrier generation, and main stat, also perfectly fine if you're going for it. On the beard here, we are having all stat, okay, if you don't get 42 int, like the all stat is also suitable. Even though we are with the legendary node, every 20 int gives us even more burn damage. So like if you can, int is definitely better than all stats. And we are also having the option to get 21% damage to conjuration, but that would only mean we are boosting our Hydra solely with 21% damage. And this is also the reason why like 14% fire damage outscales the 21 conjuration by a lot. Then if we're taking a look at the gloves, we've already said our build is going to be crit rate centered and crit damage centered. So those are important stats right here. And we've already talked about how R speed is actually being calculated in and why it's so strong with the Erosi's Ferocity key passive. So what we definitely want to have is crit rate, crit damage. The attack speed is definitely better than the 42 int, but of course, if you're getting something else, it doesn't matter. And since I am playing hardcore, I am really valuing the stat damage sorry, this was a misconception. To do proc our Eros Ferocity, we need to kill an enemy with a crit rate. And if we're dealing 35% damage to injured enemies, it's way more likely for us to get this key passive going and keep it up all the time. So this is something, if you can, of course, I would always want to have on my gear. And now we are coming to this, what I've actually just wanted to say, that since I'm playing hardcore, I really value the stat damage reduction while injured. Because, for example, we can take damage. Let's say we are at like 30% health. We will then pop a barrier and go back into fight, which then means this 31.5% damage reduction while injured is scaling onto our barrier as well, while we are healing up in the background. So this will give us such an amazing death protection right here. It's going to be insane. And then, of course, like whenever we can get flat life, we want to have flat life. It's really important. Firewall, one of our main damage skills, can be found onto the pen, so we want to go for it. And then I found this affix damage to elites. I have personally not had it in the beta, so I hope it exists. If it doesn't exist, and it was just a misconception from the data mining, then just go for one of those right here. Where we are also having the damage reduction from burning enemies and the normal flat damage reduction. Here, if you want to know which one to choose, and it's also important to know how the scaling effects work. So if you would only go into damage reduction from burning enemies and have like 200% of them, but then you would go into to a build where you had 100% damage reduction, 50% damage reduction, like from burning enemies 150 from damage reduction solely, and 50% damage reduction from something else, you would have a total of 225% damage reduction, comparing to only stacking one source of damage reduction. So you need to balance out your damage reductions because they are added multiplicatively. Oh wait, I forgot something right here. The pants can also drop an additional bonus. So it basically rolls on the top row, and here you are able to get another way of dropping a barrier. So if you're injured and you get in the orb, you have max life as a barrier. So max life, again, important, another source of barrier. Barrier also means more damage, so you can see how everything comes together. Then on our boots, maybe let's start with the bonus right here. I personally think that the extra charge of evade is valuable because you will most likely not use the evade in hardcore, for example, just to progress. And that means for every elite fight, you would have 2 evades, 1 teleport. So much barriers to survivability is going to be insane. And then since we just talked about barrier, you can get ranks to ice armor right here onto your boots. And again, we talked about how valuable damage reduction while injured is. You can get this on the boots again. So you have here your defensive, movement speed, of course, great, and you can also roll your main stat. Free ranks to teleport or flame shield are definitely not as good as ice armor, because ice armor, the longer you can get the duration up from ice armor, the more likely it is for your passive of elemental attunement to proc. So yeah, those are fine if you get it. I would always try to go for ice armor here for the long run. And those are just some nice stats that you can roll if you don't get like the perfect roll right here. Then now let's talk about the weapon. You do want to have a two-handed staff and, oh, sorry for the boots right here. Yeah, you do want to have a two-handed staff that don't look like boots. You can have 2 sockets on them. Yeah, some of the best stuff you can get is like dot damage. You basically do burn damage, so it's perfectly fine. Damage to burning enemies, also fine. You will be auto-attacking quite a lot, and your firebolt will deal decent damage. So a 39.5 damage multiplicator onto your basic skill is definitely worth in this build. And we've already talked about how crazy crit damage is multiplying, so this is definitely a must-have. Now, let's talk about the gems right here. Life on kill, I think, is not a must-have, but if you have it, it's way more relaxed to play. And there's 2 options in this build to get life on kill. If you remember early when we were talking about the helmet, so the trade-off that you have to do is either you roll life on kill onto your helmet, which then allows you to put amethyst into your weapon and increase your damage, or you don't roll it on the helmet and then you would have to go with the skull to get the life on kill onto your weapon until you manage to get a decent helmet and get it off. So basically, if you roll life on kill onto your helmet, this gives you the option to put dot into your weapon. And this gives you another opportunity to roll damage onto your helmet with this trade-off right here. Now let's take a look at the amulet. Here again, we are having 1 socket, and for all the jewelries, we've already talked about a little what the biggest weakness of the sorcerer is, and this is armor, which means on all jewelry, we will put the skull to increase our armor. Then on jewelry, again, 28% damage elites. I'm not sure if it exists. If it does, it's really great. We've already talked about damage reduction while injured, how great it is. And we have the opportunity to get 2 ranks of all of our defensive skills. And if you remember, we are using 3 defensive skills, which would give us a total of 6 ranks with 1 roll, which makes this by far the best onto our amulet. And then we are having a stat that's 8% crit rate versus injured. And we need to kill injured enemies with our crit. And if we are having this up, we are having almost 50% or to 60% crit rate versus injured enemies, which makes it really, really likely to kill them with a crit and having our passive up all the time. This then could be, we also have a bunch of damage multipliers. If you feel like you need a bit more tankiness, we also have damage reduction on the amulet. And then just some other like conjuration damage we talked about. It's not that great, right? And the ranks to conjuration or mastery skills are okay, but you will only get 2 points from it. So you can either get 2 points into Hydra from it or 2 points into Firewall. So it by far doesn't scale as well as the defensive skills. Then we are having the rings. Here, again, is another option to get life. So we're taking life. Crit rate and crit damage scales perfectly into our build, so it's a no pop. And then we have different options to actually fulfill our last slots. With like fire damage, damage to burning. It doesn't really matter, just get anything that you can go right here. And important to note on rings, you always have 2 slots above your other slots where you can roll elemental resistances. So in there, you want to go into your stats and check which elemental resistance you have the least of, and then try to optimize this. This is of course like really, really endgame, but we are talking here about best in slot stuff. And as promised, at the end of the video, here is the level cheat sheet for the Burn Sorcerer. You will have all the level pathing. This also includes the skill points that you can get additional from the Renown. We will not go over it. We have talked about skills a lot already, and the guide is already pretty long. Just maybe one last disclaimer. There were no uniques used on purpose in this guide, as they will be really hard to drop. And as soon as you manage to get to World Tier 3 with this build, I highly recommend you to farm helmets as a specific slot if you're not missing something else, and go for the unique Harlequin crest. I really hope you liked this guide and it helped you a lot understanding the Burn Sorcerer. If there are still any questions open, comment below the video. I will always answer everything in less than 24 hours. If you want to see this build being played out in hardcore, join my unique concept stream on Twitch, where whenever I die, a community event triggers in which you can win nice prizes from the cash shop, like skins, mounts, and even battle passes. So don't forget to subscribe and not miss out. Cheers!